What up, perps? Kid Copious, back in effect. Purple State Party. You know what we're doing here? We're repping America, the center, and common sense. We're going to look at numbers today, so, well, just hold tight, because I'm probably going to fumble through them. Let's kick it off. So I found this article on CNN. So like I've said before, I read both sides. I don't like to live in an echo chamber. I think echo chambers are probably the worst thing you can do, really. But anyhow, anti-Olympic protests in Milan turn violent as Italy investigates suspected train railway sabotage. Anti-Olympic protesters marched peacefully through Milan on Saturday afternoon, but when night fell, the demonstration turned violent as some protesters targeted police in their vans, and officials responded with tear gas and water cannons. Yeah, this is pretty much a scene that we see repeated here a lot in the United States, During the day, you have your little peaceful protest. Meanwhile, riling up, the police, riling up the people who are going to get violent at night. Because at nighttime it's harder to read the signs that you're holding, so you got to set buildings on fire, apparently. But originally this started with an activist organization called the Unsustainable Olympics Committee. And they might have some legitimate concerns. I, for one, think that the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is very corrupt. And I do think that they do cause some environmental impact that maybe isn't necessary. That's always one of those questions, that comes up. Is it necessary? But anyhow, so what they did was they mobilized a wide coalition of grassroots sports groups, civic and environmental movements, students, housing activists, combative aid unions, pro-Palestine networks, and trans-feminist collectives. See, I think what happened here was CNN thought that because this wasn't happening at the United States, people couldn't apply it to what happens in the United States. But that's what these people do. They draw in all of these different groups. They get the pro-Palestine network there, to say, hey, let's protest Israel. And I don't know what combative unions had to say about the Olympics. Maybe the Olympics aren't a union shop. I don't know what the trans feminists are there for, but they get these people there. And the problem that I see is that what happened at night when the protesters started throwing fireworks, launching fireworks at police officers, and police officers employed water cannons and tear gas in response. Yeah, I think we need that in the United States, water cannons. Let's see how much damage these little cretins do when they're soaking wet in the middle of the night in a Minnesota chill. But anyhow, they coordinate these people knowing that out of each one of these groups, these combative unions, these trans feminists, these pro-Palestine networks, these environmentalists, that a fraction of them, a percentage of them, are willing to fight the police, burn buildings, vandalize cars, harass civilians, like we saw in France. Antifa killed a kid. They didn't like what he had to say. They killed him. They beat him down. They stabbed him. And one of them is connected to the government. They know these people are going to show up. And that's one of the reasons why we're talking about numbers, because a lot of times people want to downplay the numbers. But, when you're talking about, 10% of the protesters want to incite violence, and you get 10,000 people out there, well, you got 1,000 people who are willing to commit violence, who are willing to pull people out of cars, who are willing to block traffic, fight police officers, burn buildings, et cetera, et cetera. But along with that, up in the northern Italian city of Bologna, they found an explosive device on a switch. That's not good, planting bombs. They also cut electrical cables to the high-speed trains. They started a fire on an electrical cabinet. See, they're willing to go to these extremes because their leaders, who sit back way away from the fray, tell them that they're justified to do this. They did this in France during the 2024 Olympics. They sabotaged the trains. They don't care if people get hurt. They don't even really care about their cause. That's the odd thing that goes on with these groups. Remember here when we were having all those so-called pro-Palestine or pro-Hamas demonstrations at college campuses like Columbia University? Keep Columbia in your mind because we'll be talking about them a little more in a bit here. But they get these people there like Queers for Palestine. Well, what the Queers for Palestine don't realize is that if these people get their way and Sharia law becomes the law of the land, the Queers for Palestine people are the first people lined up against the wall and shot. That's how this works. This is the Marxist handbook. You draw in these groups that shouldn't have anything to do with each other. Like, why is a trans feminist organization joining a rally with pro-Palestine? Do they really think Palestinians are down with the transgender people? They're not. But you draw them in. You say, oh, well, maybe you should protest the fact that they won't let men compete in women's sports. Oh, okay, we'll be there. And you could be here to protest the environmental impact. And you could be here because they didn't use union labor. And you could be here because, Israel's so bad. They get all these groups together and then they just watch it explode. And what, at the end of the day, are they even trying to do? They're trying to stop the Olympics? What purpose is that going to solve? I mean, every year we have these stupid conferences where they talk about global warming and they all fly there in their private jets. Nobody seems to mind that the leaders of your party are flying around in private jets and they're committing all kinds of environmental impact. You don't care about that. Because at the end of the day, this is extortion. This is the left-wing party using the Marxist handbook to sow fear and confusion and chaos around the United States and then say, we're the ones who can handle it. Well, that's bullshit. Because I've never met a socialist leader that actually kept control of his country through peace and peaceful means. No, they're all a bunch of fucking dictators. Speaking of dictators and protests, here's a protest that actually makes some sense. Protesters took to the streets in Albania. Thousands of anti-government protesters violently faced off against riot police outside government buildings in Albania's capital, Tirana, earlier in the week as people called for the resignation of the government following a massive corruption scandal. The deputy prime minister has been indicted on charges that they used improper influence to favor one company in the tender for construction of a 3.7-mile tunnel in southern Albania. So when this person was suspended, Baluku was suspended, the prime minister basically just subpoenaed the person and put him back into power. And why? Because this Rama, who runs Albania, has been in power for more than a decade. They centralize authority and personalizing state institutions, while his government has faced persistent allegations of cooperation with organized crime and the misuse of public funds and public access for the benefit of politically corrected candidates. Yeah. The worst part about this is that, as this article says, the shady circumstances surrounding Rama's most important ally and the lack of accountability reinforces the sentiment that is pervasive in Albanian society, that their government is rife with corruption, with both the incumbent government and the opposition figures accused of corruption. Public confidence in institutions and the justice system has steadily been eroded. That's what we're headed to here. Look at California. Look at how much money is being spent on things that none of us agreed to. I don't know, why we can't have plastic bags at grocery stores, why we have to endure the fragility of paper bags. Nobody voted on that. People just started passing these laws. We voted to put in a high-speed rail, but we were sold a false bill of goods. It's not going to run where they said it was going to run. It's not going to be done when they said it was going to be done. And it's certainly not going to cost what it's going to be, what we voted on. Newsom has passed so many environmental laws that he's driven refinery companies out. He's driving manufacturing out. He's driving all of these companies out of California through his policies that none of us voted for. And speaking of not voting for things, the United Nations. United Nations, my God, that is one of the dumbest, corrupt organizations on the face of this planet. Anytime they try to censor anybody, China, Russia, somebody like that, one of the allies of that group just says no, and the UN drops it. Well, in this case, this is ridiculous. The United Nations is facing sharp criticism after Iran was appointed vice chair of the UN Commission for Social Development, a body whose mandate includes promoting democracy, women's rights, and social inclusion. Really, because Iran does none of that. Iran and their cadre of allies, they don't promote democracy, they don't promote women's rights, and they certainly don't include social inclusion. The move drew immediate pushback from U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, who wrote, "Yet another reason why we are not a member of, nor do we participate in this ridiculous Commission for Social Development." The Geneva-based watchdog UN Watch noted that Iran was elected to leadership posts without objections from any other member states, despite Tehran's widely criticized human rights records. Yeah, they are out. Iran enforces their laws brutally. We saw what they did when people rose up in protest. They killed somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40,000 people who were protesting, who were asking for an end to this Islamic Republic. They want to go back to being Persia. They want to be a free and welcoming society. They don't want to be under the grip of this Sharia law concoction that they've got going on in Iran. But nobody wants to listen to that. Nobody wants to stand up and take a stand anymore. So here's a blast from the past. Kamala Harris. She praises Minneapolis' resistance to immigration enforcement as a beautiful example for the country. It's not resistance. It's extortion. As long as Trump is in office, the Democrats are going to continue to burn cities. The liberals, the lefties. I don't even know if they're Democrats anymore. I mean, I've said it before. I think the Democrats need to divorce themselves from the extreme left. But they're not going to. They need it. But it is extortion. Make no doubt about it. It's going to be interesting because what's going on in Minneapolis and Minnesota is ending. ICE is going to pull out of there. So where are they going to go next? Where's Antifa? Where are all these radical elements going to go next? That's going to be interesting. But keep in mind that, two Democrats, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, both publicly denounced illegal immigration. Obama even used it to go after Bush and said, I've got to clean up the 5 million illegal aliens that Bush let into this country. Do they even go after the causes? No. You ever notice how they're out there protesting ICE enforcement, but they're not protesting governments like Maduro or governments around the world, leftist dictators who are fueling this? Some of these countries have lost significant portions of their population to immigrating to the United States because they're fleeing the conditions in their homeland. These leftist dictators, they use the promise of the warmth of collectivism to gain power, and then they hold it indefinitely. They use the students all across history. We have seen this, where these ruthless dictators have enlisted college people to say, look, the current system isn't working. If you elect me, I'm going to have free gas stations and rent control and all the things Mandami was promising. But then once they get into power, they use that power to enrich their lives and watch as society crumbles. It's countless examples across history of this. But does the left ever stand up to that? Does the left ever do anything to try to help? Remember Kamala Harris when she was border czar? She went down to South and Central America to look at the root causes of illegal immigration, but did nothing about it, really reported nothing about it. Because that's not what's important. What's important is riling up the young people to burn down cities, to distract from your own misgivings or misdeeds, such as in Minnesota, where they're rife with corruption. So let's burn some buildings down, let's beat up some cops, and maybe nobody will pay attention to the corruption anymore. My bet is it's coming to California next, because California already exposing all kinds of fraud, and immigration's going to be here. We're a sanctuary state. Yay. Did any of us vote on that? No. None of that. And on the subject of numbers, Katie Couric was interviewing Rand Paul, and she kept harping on the fact that only 14% of the migrants arrested in Minnesota had violent crimes. Okay. Sure. Like Rand Paul retorted, if your family was attacked by a criminal migrant, how many of them were violent wouldn't matter much. It doesn't really matter. If that's what's going on in this country, if we're seeing a rise in illegal immigrants committing crimes, something needs to be done. So when she brought up the 14% again in the conversation, he said, well, I don't think the percentage, it makes a halfway argument on how much effort we should have. But if Minnesota's not going to turn over anybody, the whole argument, whether it's 14 or 86%, doesn't mean anything. Because Minnesota's turning over 0% of people who commit crimes and are known to be in the country illegally. See, that's the problem here. We're not talking about people who commit like a DUI, and then Minnesota turns them over to ICE to see if they're illegal. They know they're illegal. And whether or not they're committing serious crimes or not is immaterial. Any of them that are working are using fraudulent documents, which can affect an American citizen's, right to pursue happiness, which is tied to finances, monetary happiness. When you're racking up taxes on somebody else's Social Security, that has ill effect. We've heard about the kid who was denied Medicare because he made too much money. But the other part that gets overlooked in this argument by Katie Couric is 14% of the 400,000, right? She said, having said that, though, what about the 14%? Such a low percentage of 400,000 people. Well, that's still in the neighborhood of 50,000 criminals. I'm sorry for the other people, okay? But keep in mind, when they talk about committed a serious crime, that's only here in the United States. They don't look at what they did in their previous countries. They don't look at the criminals who are on the run who simply haven't been caught in the United States. How many of those 400,000 people that ICE picked up, how many of them actually did commit crimes, but they just weren't caught? But it doesn't matter either way. You can't come into the country illegally. It's not good for anybody. It's not. I don't know where it's only good for those people. And that's not the way we're supposed to be running this thing. So, right now the Democrats would have you believe that they stand with the illegal immigrants. They stand with immigration. Immigration is our strength, some of them say. Well, okay, what about Iryna? What about that little Ukrainian girl? That young woman who fled the Ukraine, fled war and possible rape and murder, fled to the United States only to be stabbed to death on a train, a public train, by a career criminal. And any love for her? No. Elon Musk and some other people got together and decided to paint her mural in different cities. One of them you could see on my thumbnail. They're beautiful paintings. They're a reminder of what happens when you're soft on crime. But those murals are being vandalized by local lefties. They hate them. The lefties in New York City hate them. A mural of murdered Ukrainian refugee that's loathed by local lefties for its tough-on-crime message and ties to Elon Musk was vandalized in Manhattan, irking neighbors who on Friday called the defacement a disgusting act of political spite. Who wrote this article? Fox News? No. This is from MSN. Yeah. Left-leaning neighbors believe it was likely painted to inflame political tensions. Really? Really? The whole message of Republicans. Huh. This one person who was a teacher who lives in the neighborhood. I do think that the motivations behind the mural is pushing a right-wing, tough-on-crime narrative. As opposed to what? The Democrats just letting them out of jail? Well, does anybody not see the illogical nature of that argument? I know a lot of people do see it because they vote Republican. We have tried now for a couple of decades the soft on crime approach, and it doesn't fucking work. All right? You're going to go back, and then the argument, of course, is going to be like, oh, well, it's more expensive to keep them in jail. It costs more than to keep them in jail than to send somebody to college. I don't give a fuck. If that's the way these people act, then they need to be locked away. Look what we do with rabid animals. I'm an animal lover myself, but if a fucking raccoon has rabies, it needs to be put down. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. I'm celebrating right now because a wolf has returned to the local area. A wolf. We haven't seen wolves here in quite a long time. They're making a comeback. But at the same time, do we really need their population to explode to the point where they start wandering our city streets? Because unlike coyotes, wolves can be violent. And that's the problem. This teacher went on to say, they're literally trying to use this white woman's face who was murdered to push a right-wing tough-on-crime narrative that I don't agree with. Whoa, you don't agree with that? I guess you've never been mugged. Because you changed your mind. And that was from MSN. All right, which is not, I'm not going to label them one way or the other, but it's certainly not a right-wing newspaper or news site. What did The Guardian say? Now, The Guardian, MAGA is funding murals of slain Ukrainian refugee. Are they weaponizing her memory? Huh. Wow. Weaponizing her memory. So a young girl sitting on a train gets stabbed in the neck by a career criminal. That alone should weaponize people against this soft on crime, these George Soros DAs who would rather visit the criminal than the victim. We're literally seeing that. Then, I wanted to know more about this. I wanted to know what people were saying. And I ended up at this website called Cap Wolf. Cap, C-A-P, Wolf. Broader implications for public safety. Her death spotlighted concerns many share about transit safety. Public transportation should feel secure, yet incidents remind us vulnerabilities persist. Repeat offenders, mental health crises, inadequate intervention. These factors converge tragically too often. Kapolf went on to say, rehabilitation programs aim to help, but when they fall short, consequences hit innocents hardest. Advocates push for a balanced approach, support for those struggling, protection for everyone else. It's complex, requiring nuance, often missing in heated discussions. And they put up a chart that had the key factors, the common challenge, and the potential solution. And I love this. This is from a website, like I said, Capwolf. It's basically crypto trading. But because they don't have like a political alliance, I guess, they just wrote it out. Key factor. Mental health support intervention. Common challenge, limited access and resources. Potential solutions, expanded crisis intervention. Okay, that's fine. I think police should be trained and armed to deal with these things properly. I don't want unarmed civilians trying to get in between a guy with a knife and potential victims, okay? You need to be able to stop them. If the shit hits the fan, you need to be able to stop them. Key factor, repeat offenses. Common challenge, insufficient monitoring. Potential solution, stronger supervision programs. Fine. If you're going to let these people out with ankle monitors on, then monitor the ankle monitors and hit them hard. Put the fear of God into them. That's how I got myself back on track. I was scared to death to go to county jail. I do not want to go to Gen Pop, all right? So I straightened up and flew straight. I got a job. I suffered. I couldn't afford the drugs anymore, so I had to quit those. You know, I had already gone through rehab for alcohol, so I stayed away from that. As I went on to say, key factor, public transit safety. Common challenge, increased vulnerability. Yeah, you got crazies on the train. So the potential solution is enhanced security measures, but not just people in yellow vests. Armed officers tasked with taking down these bad actors. If you want, like here in California, if you want us to use more public transport, then you got to make it so that innocent people just trying to go to work don't have to endure harassment, inappropriate touching, violence, robbery. Those kind of things happen. It's not a Republican talking point. That's what happens. Trains and buses can be a creepy place. But they don't want to address that. They want to label all of that as all I'm doing is bringing up a right-wing talking point. See, safe buses is a right-wing talking point. Really? Okay, what is the left-wing talking point? Let's just let the career criminals out? See, the good thing that we had with 3 strikes laws was it set a limit on how many times you were able to F up. And that's what we need in this country. If we need more prisons, then we have to build more prisons. If private prisons become prisons for profit, I don't really give a shit, okay? There are people out there who have proven to be not right for society. They shouldn't be there. They should be removed from society. Think about what happens in cases where the family pet bites someone. The dog is often taken away from the family, and even more often, they're euthanized. I'm not saying we should treat people like dogs, but maybe we should close the gap a little bit. Tough on crime is a right-wing talking point. How fucking dumb are these people? I want to say that in no way do I ever condone slavery. Right now, Afghanistan has reinstated slavery. You don't see much about that. But one thing I am really not against is reparations. As a lover of history, I do believe that reparations were at one point justified. I think there were a lot of people who profited from slavery and people who were subject to slavery. None of those people are alive anymore. And while there may be descendants of slaves and there may be descendants of people who made money off of slavery, they're not using slavery anymore. I've long thought that reparations is just a complete and utter vote grab. Right now, San Francisco is being sued by the Pacific Legal Foundation, claiming that the ordinance violates Equal Protection Clause by using taxpayer money for race-based programs. That's what it is. I mean, if we're going to set up anti-discrimination laws in this country, which I'm glad we have, then they have to be applied fairly across the board. Okay? All right? I get it. I'm a straight white male. Okay? My kind have fared pretty well through history. I admit that. That doesn't mean that you now punish the people who, at one point, it's so dumb. I don't understand how people don't see through this, but they're being sued on the grounds that it's race based. But they brought up some really interesting points. The lawsuit alleges that the ordinance is discriminating on the basis of race because it allows taxpayer money to be funneled into the reparations fund. The plaintiff said a win would protect taxpayers from supporting a government-based, racially motivated program and establish boundaries for other cities implementing similar policies. One of the attorneys, Anthony Quino, said acknowledging past injustices does not give the government license to spend public money on programs that sort people by race and ancestry today. Went on to say, the Constitution requires the city to address proven harm directly, not through sweeping racial and ancestral classifications. This lawsuit is about ensuring that all Americans are treated as individuals under the law and not forced to subsidize government policies that collectively bind them to history that they did not experience or inflict. It's very important. History is filled with people doing bad things. We correct those bad things. And now we're supposed to pay for it? See, the problem is that in a lot of these states and in a lot of these countries, corruption and fraud lead the governments down some really bad paths. California, a year after the Palisades fire and just a blip of homes are being rebuilt because we have all of these regulations designed to protect the environment. All of those laws were put there by environmentalist lobby groups who in one way or another donated campaign funds to people like Gavin Newsom or Swalwell. Quick tangent, Swalwell apparently used $22,000 of campaign money to go to the Super Bowl. Did you go to the Super Bowl? No. We could barely afford to watch the Super Bowl. Anyhow, real quick, we were talking about Columbia University. It appears that at one point, Columbia University allowed Jeffrey Epstein to bribe a girl into their school. Yeah. Politicians on both sides of the fences were taking money from Epstein. But one thing to always remember is that, when all of this came out originally, when Epstein was arrested before he killed himself, the FBI poured over his bank accounts and emails, searched his home, spent years interviewing people, and basically came to the conclusion that he was not running any sort of trafficking ring. This was just a rich guy providing favors. He used his money and his influence to get people into Columbia University and other universities. And now these same universities want to try to tell us what we should do or think. Columbia University was home to a lot of discrimination against Jewish students. The reason why we need a purple party, a legitimate purple party, is because both groups, Republicans and Democrats, have become corrupt. Republicans, I think, fall more on the financially corrupt side, getting money, getting kickbacks, doing favors for people. And the Democrats are more corrupt in the way they keep power, the way they pretend to be for the people, but then pass laws that really do not help the people at all. A great example of that is what we've seen in recent years where people with 70 plus arrests, people who have proven themselves to not be right with society, are allowed to get on public transport and stab a young girl to death. I think that's the problem in a nutshell. I don't know. It's really frustrating. I think a lot of people out there are in the same boat I'm in. We're really frustrated by the way our country's going right now. We thought we had an opportunity with Trump to maybe right the ship, and I think in some ways he has righted the ship a bit. But he's not unifying anybody. And one of the reasons why he's not unifying anybody is because the leftists, the Marxists, the extreme left are not allowing him. So once again, I'm calling for a Democrat divorce from the far left. Republicans, they've distanced themselves from the far right. You don't see Nick Fuentes speaking at GOP events anymore. They realize he's a lunatic and a racist, so they dumped him. I'm pleading with the Democrats, please, dump these extremist groups. They're not helping. But, of course, if all you're trying to do is extort America and cover up things like corruption in Minnesota, then it's working perfectly for you. But that's the problem. Are we really going to accept political parties doing what's best for the political party and not the citizens? I don't know. I'm just a dude. I'm Kid Copious. I'm Purple State Party, and so are you. Love one another. Keep on grinding. And you know what I'm going to say. Dance it out.